want to welcome you to another YouTube video. I want to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about dopamine. And the reason being is that today, more than ever, people are finding themselves struggling with poor memory and a loss of pleasure in life and just a lack of motivation and sadly, feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness. If these symptoms are familiar to you, you or a loved one may be struggling with low or unbalanced levels of dopamine, sometimes called the motivation molecule. Now, what causes this? Is this just poor genetics? Is this something you were born with? Is this something you have to live with for the rest of your life with no promise of improvement? Or is there something else going on behind the scenes? Well, in today's video, I'm going to talk about dopamine, or this motivation molecule, and some of the other symptoms of low dopamine levels. I'll talk about why medications don't fix the underlying root cause of low dopamine in most people. I'll talk about the best ways to support low dopamine levels. I'll talk to you about how certain tests may shed light on why your dopamine levels may be low. I'll show you what that testing looks like and how it helps us understand this whole process better. Also, I'll talk about some of my favorite supplements to help with dopamine levels. I'll share with you some of my favorite strategies that you'll be able to implement right away after watching today's video. Finally, I'll share with you one of the questionnaires that I use in practice that helps me understand more about a patient's mental health. And so we have lots to unpack here today. And so this video, and of course, in future videos from today, we'll start to build on the one that we go through today. And so if you're not a subscriber to our YouTube channel yet, then make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you know when we post these new videos. All right, so let's get started here. What is dopamine and what happens if you have low levels, right? Well, number one is that dopamine is the primary neurotransmitter made in the brain, and when levels are low or unbalanced, we find it difficult to handle or manage stress. Maybe we prefer to be alone. We lose pleasure in hobbies that we once enjoyed. Food, believe it or not, doesn't taste as good as it once did. We lose our desire in life. We have a loss of sex drive. Again, we feel worthless. Our emotions are flat. We don't experience highs and lows in life. We're kind of flatlined and just bored in life sometimes. We don't find life interesting. Essentially, we've lost our zest for life. Now, what do all these symptoms have in common? Well, two words: the pleasure system and problems with low dopamine are one of the main culprits that affect the pleasure system. All right, think about it like this. In life, there are two things that have been said to motivate people, right? Pain and, of course, pleasure, right? If you're like most people, the things that make you feel good are the things that you want to do over and over and over again, right? Things that cause pain, of course, we want to avoid, right? Eating good food, having good sex, making lots of money, receiving praise, but those are just the physical things that are tied into dopamine production. You see, the things that we drink and eat are also chemicals that also affect our dopamine levels. Things like alcohol, coffee, and drugs. Things like cocaine, amphetamines, nicotine from cigarette smoking. These can all increase dopamine levels, but then cause low levels once we come off that high. And so for those of you who experience the symptoms of low dopamine, this pleasure and reward system goes terribly wrong. We don't experience the highs, and when we experience the lows, we can't seem to get out of that rut. But here's the good news. If you or someone you know is experiencing low dopamine levels or low neurotransmitters, once we know what's causing this, there are things that can be done to help improve this in many cases and reverse all those symptoms. So why medications for problems with dopamine don't fix the problem? Let me give you 10 things that can be at the root cause of your low dopamine levels, and then I'll explain in detail how they cause low levels of dopamine. So number one, low protein diets. Low protein diet, amino acids that fail to provide those amino acid precursors, things like tyrosine and phenylalanine, right? Nutritional deficiencies that fail to provide nutrient cofactors, such as deficiencies in vitamin B6 or vitamin C, copper, iron, magnesium, SAM, E, believe it or not. Blood sugar problems caused by high carb, high sugar diets that lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. stress from fluctuating cortisol levels and adrenal fatigue syndrome, genetic SNPs or polymorphisms in MTHFR, COMT, and MAO, bacterial overgrowth with C.diff, elevated levels of prolactin, excessive caffeine use, exposure to toxic metals such as lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury. All right, oxidative stress can cause problems with dopamine-producing nerve cells. So, as you can see here, there's a lot of different factors here that go on, and there are things that we can assess through testing that can help us understand some of the potential root causes behind this imbalance or disturbance to your dopamine levels. Now, I want you to be asking yourself if drugs like Wellbutrin or drugs like Requip or Zyprexa or any other drug for that matter, do they fix the problem? Do they get to the root cause of any of the problems that we just listed? And the answer, of course, is no, right? If you're taking any of these medications, perhaps you should discuss the possibilities with your doctor and see if there might be better ways to address your mental health problems. So those are the 10 things that I have and think about when it comes to problems that are worth investigating as the possible culprits for low dopamine production. Now, in upcoming videos, what I'll do is I'll get into more of the details of each of these. But for now, I want you to start becoming familiar with the idea that if you haven't looked into these possible causes, these are some of the very real things that could drastically change your life for the better and ultimately turn your whole life around. Let me talk a little bit about some of the testing that can provide insight into dopamine use and production. And so how can we test for dopamine levels? If you look at this illustration here, first off, don't be overwhelmed by it, okay? I'll explain and point out some of the most important things that I want you to know about. And to start with, I want to first point out a few things, which number one is you'll notice that the whole process of producing dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine, it all starts with two very important amino acids, right? You can see that here, phenylalanine and tyrosine. Again, you can see this, they're in this orange box, right? Now, the second thing I want you to notice here is that some of the vitamins in red that you see playing a part in the conversion of one substance into the next. Now, for example, in order to convert tyrosine into L-dopa, you need to have adequate levels of vitamin B6. Now, in order to convert dopamine to norepinephrine, you'll see that you need copper and vitamin C. And in order to convert norepinephrine into epinephrine, you'll see here that you need SAMe. So, if you at any time, struggle with anxiety, you may be having problems with epinephrine and norepinephrine because these are your fight or flight neurotransmitters. So this is why diet and nutrition play such a huge role for people with depression, loss of focus, and other low dopamine symptoms. And then later in today's video, I'll go on to show you some important strategies that will help you. Okay. Now, the third thing I want to point out here is that epinephrine is another name for adrenaline. Okay? Now, the reason I point this out is that norepinephrine and epinephrine both come from dopamine. Often when we have problems with one neurotransmitter, we're also going to have problems in other areas as well. So here again, this is why it's so important to look at the entire picture, this big picture, okay? Now, the very next thing I want you to see here is where it says dopamine beta hydroxylase. Now, this is one of the key enzymes that converts dopamine into norepinephrine. And that what you'll notice here is that in order to make the conversion, you need vitamin C and you need copper. Now, before I move on to another illustration, I want to point out that there are a lot of players and a lot of moving parts going on here. So the wrong supplementation, the wrong vitamins, too much of the wrong amino acid, or not having an understanding of how some of these certain genes, COMT and MAO, could create a handful of very unpleasant symptoms. So it's very, very important if you have a mental health issue and you're struggling with mental health issues that you work with a certified functional medicine doctor to help with these, because only they will have the experience and understanding of these various pathways. So please understand that the reason I show all of this to you is to help you gain a better appreciation into things that your doctor should be looking into in order to properly manage your case and hopefully help you get better. Right? Now, just prescribing antidepressants will not solve the underlying mechanism of low dopamine. Now, with that being said, let me show you a test recently ran on one of my patients who is struggling with a variety of symptoms related to low dopamine. If you look at this test here, the marker that we want to pay special attention to, the one that says homovanillate, you can see that this is marker number 23. And the value here is 1.5. And as you'll notice here, it got flagged as being low. The range for homovanillate is 1.2 to 13.9. So ideally, we want to see this number about 6 or 7, right? When homovanillate levels are low, that means that we have low levels of tyrosine, or L-DOPA, and dopamine production. But we still don't know why yet. So here, again, is why we need to do a little bit further digging, a little bit more investigative work. Now, earlier in the video, I listed out 10 things that can cause low dopamine, right? And this, again, is why and why we need to do some further investigation. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't worry if you missed them, all right? Because you can head over to my website where there'll be a transcript of today's video, and they'll all be listed there, so don't worry about that. If we have low homovanillate levels, or HVA levels, we would expect someone to have low dopamine levels. And with low dopamine, we see all these low dopamine symptoms that we've been talking about. Things such as fatigue and depression and sleeping problems, loss of motivation, loss of focus, loss of libido, loss of enthusiasm, right? All of that goes along with all those other symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Now, one of the tests I use for this, to understand this a little bit better, is what's called the urine organic acid test. And so far, I've talked about the symptoms of low dopamine, again, that motivation molecule, some of the root causes of low dopamine, which again were those 10 things that we just listed out. I showed you some of the testing that we use to learn more about dopamine metabolism. Now, I talked about some of the reasons behind low VMA. And the last thing I want to talk about, the last thing I want to really just cover with you here, is how to raise those levels of dopamine naturally, right? So number one is make sure that you're not on a low protein diet, right? If you're struggling with mental health problems, right? If you're a vegan or a vegetarian, or you're only eating meat 1 to 2 times a week, please, please, please reconsider eating foods like beef and lamb and chicken and pork and eggs several times per week. Consider eating things like pumpkin seeds and beans, which are all rich in these amino acids, tyrosine and phenylalanine, which again, like I said earlier, tyrosine and phenylalanine are needed in order to make dopamine. Also keep in mind that 60% of your brain is fat, so make sure that you are avoiding those vegetable oils, right? Those fats like corn and cottonseed and safflower and sunflower. Again, if you're eating fats that are higher in omega-3, essential fatty acids, that's going to displace some of those omega-6 fats like corn, canola, cottonseed, safflower, and sunflower. You want to avoid those omega-6s and really beef up those omega-3 levels, right? I also recommend that you want to ditch any stimulants, so things like caffeine and energy drinks, nicotine, for example. All of these things really are initially raise your levels, raise your dopamine levels, and then just as fast as they raise them, they cause them to plummet. And this is where, again, usually after an hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes in some people, after having that coffee, they're crashing. Or after that cigarette, they're crashing, needing another smoke, right? So again, these are causing your dopamine levels to crash. Number two, you need strong stomach acid, right? Stomach acid is essential because it's that stomach acid, hydrochloric acid, that helps break down proteins into those amino acids like tyrosine and like phenylalanine. So here again, you want to optimize digestion of proteins. And again, this can be incredibly helpful to supplement your diet with things like betaine, hydrochloric acid, pepsin, right? So again, make sure that you're digesting those proteins. A while back, I talked about a few videos that I did, and specifically I talked about the importance of stomach acid. And specifically I talked about the causes of why we develop low stomach acid. And again, what low stomach acid symptoms really look like. So I would encourage you, again, if you're suffering with these mental health issues and really wanting to address the cause, go back and watch those videos, because sometimes something as simple as improving digestion can help improve those amino acid levels in your body, which again provide the raw material to create and produce these neurotransmitters. Number three, address any vitamin or mineral deficiency. All right? Remember that earlier we talked about many enzymes needed to make dopamine and other neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, norepinephrine, require various vitamins and minerals, right? These are what are called as cofactors. And so these may be things like iron and copper and B6, magnesium, SAMe. Again, so you have to think about how all of these things, including these vitamins and multi-minerals, and how these deficiencies play a role into all of this, right? All of these, if we're deficient in, will impair how our body produces dopamine, right? Also, like I said earlier, make sure that the minerals that you're taking, perhaps things like copper and iron, make sure that your multi-mineral supplements don't leave these guys out, right? Which sometimes, for various reasons, manufacturers do leave them out. Number 4 is support your adrenal glands, right? Your adrenal glands, it only makes sense to support your adrenal glands here because your adrenal glands are your fight or flight glands, right? These are the glands that help you determine whether or not you're fighting or flighting, right? Help you react to stress. These are, again, major problems and an important strategy when thinking about supporting your dopamine levels. Another thing that's worth considering is if you're perimenopausal or menopausal and you're suffering with anxiety and depression and other low dopamine symptoms, right? Very important to support those hormones. Number 5 is support your gut, right? We know that a healthy gut equals a healthy brain. I'll do another video specifically talking about the importance of the microbiome on mental health, but if you already have symptoms of things like bloating and gas and indigestion and constipation, maybe you suspect SIBO or leaky gut, focus on correcting these problems, right? Clostridial overgrowth or a yeast overgrowth are common denominators that we see with people suffering with mental health problems. In the 20 years that I've been in practice, practicing functional medicine, it's no surprise to me that when I work with a patient who has known GI problems, that they often report improvement to things like depression and anxiety and brain fog. All of these things disappear, they improve when working on the gut. So always keep that brain-gut connection in mind. Number 6 is if you have a sugar tooth, right? Get this under control, right? If you find yourself fatigued after you eat, or you find yourself moody and irritable, or you've skipped a meal, even if your glucose levels are normal on blood work, I would almost guarantee that you're suffering with blood sugar dysregulation, right? Your brain does not like this roller coaster ride of high levels of glucose and low levels of glucose. So again, the key here is you can eat more frequent meals, and within 30 minutes of waking up, don't skip meals, especially if there's mental health issues. I've seen so many patients improve mental health just by getting on a regular, more consistent diet or frequency of eating, all right? So I don't recommend skipping meals if there's some blood sugar issues going on there. Number 7 is you need to exercise, right? Think about it like this. This isn't about losing weight per se. This is about brain stimulation. The brain is stimulated by movement, especially movement of the limbs. So while movement is essential for everybody, it's especially important and critical for people with depression. And of course, those looking to improve their mental health naturally, don't be afraid to join a local gym, all right? So again, get that sweat on, move your body, move your limbs. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Those are some strategies to help naturally improve your dopamine levels. Make sure you subscribe to our channel because we'll be talking a lot more about dopamine and depression in future videos. And so take care.